On the 10th of July, 2026, in a hangar at the General Air and Space Academy in San Javier, Murcia, a 20-year-old woman stood in uniform in front of her parents, her sister, and the assembled officers of the Spanish Air and Space Force, and closed a chapter that began 3 years earlier. Princess Leonor, heir to the Spanish throne, Princess of Asturias, completed the final stage of her military training today, promoted to Alferez de Fragata alumna and awarded the Grand Cross of Aeronautical Merit. King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia presided over the ceremony. Her younger sister, Infanta Sofia, stood at her side. It was, by any measure, a milestone day. But the question worth asking is not whether Leonor finished her training. She did. The question worth asking is what this moment actually represents, and why so many are already calling it a test, not of her flying skills or her physical endurance, but of something much less visible and much harder to complete. To understand why this day matters, you have to go back to where it started. In the summer of 2023, Leonor entered the General Military Academy in Zaragoza as a cadet, the first step in a 3-branch training program that would take her through the Spanish Army, then the Navy, then the Air and Space Force. This was not a ceremonial gesture. It was not a photo opportunity dressed up as military service. Spanish law requires that the heir to the throne receive military instruction as part of preparing for the constitutional role of commander-in-chief, a role the future monarch will hold the moment they ascend. Leonor lived in the barracks. She followed the same physical training regimen as her fellow cadets. She was evaluated on the same standards, at least according to the royal household's public statements, though outside observers have long debated how much of that claim can be independently verified, given the closed nature of military academies and the built-in difficulty of scrutinizing how an heir to the throne is actually treated by instructors who know exactly who she is. That tension, between the official narrative of equal treatment and the practical impossibility of ever fully confirming it, has followed Leonor through every stage of this training. It followed her to the Naval Military Academy in Marin, where she spent months at sea aboard the training ship Juan Sebastián de Elcano, a 4-masted schooner that has carried generations of Spanish naval cadets across the Atlantic on a training voyage steeped in tradition. Leonor's voyage began in January of 2025. She crossed to Latin America, visited multiple countries, including a stop in New York, then flew back to Spain to join the frigate Blas de Lezo for live-fire naval maneuvers before rejoining the Elcano to complete the circuit. In July of 2025, she was promoted to midshipman of 2nd grade and received the Grand Cross of Naval Merit from her father's hand. That same month, according to reporting that has circulated in the Spanish press, Leonor was involved in a near-miss incident off the coast of Sanxenxo, in Galicia, an episode that surfaced briefly in the news cycle and then largely receded, without full public detail on what exactly occurred or how serious it was. It is worth naming that ambiguity honestly rather than filling in the blanks with speculation. Some parts of Leonor's training have been fully documented. Others have been reported in fragments, and a responsible account of her story has to resist the temptation to smooth over those fragments into something more dramatic or more certain than the record actually supports. By September of 2025, Leonor had moved to the final leg of her 3-branch rotation, the General Air and Space Academy in San Javier. This is where the more publicly visible moments of the last year took place. In December, she completed her first solo flight aboard a Pilatus PC-21 trainer aircraft, becoming the first woman in the Spanish royal family's history to pilot a solo flight. In the following months, she completed basic parachute training at the Méndez Purata Military School of Parachuting, jumping from an aircraft under supervision as part of the standard curriculum required of Air Force cadets. And today, she finished it. 3 academies, 3 branches of the armed forces, 3 years, condensed into a single ceremony under the summer sun in Murcia. So why call any of this a test, when the test, in the most literal sense, is already over? Here is where it becomes important to separate what is confirmed from what is interpretation, because the word, test, is doing 2 different jobs in the way this story is being told, and only one of those jobs is grounded in verifiable fact. The first meaning is straightforward. Leonor was tested, literally, by a curriculum of physical, technical, and academic requirements, and today's ceremony confirms she met them, at least according to the institutions responsible for training her. That much is documented. The second meaning is softer, more editorial, and it belongs to commentary rather than confirmed fact. The idea that this moment represents a test of Leonor's readiness for the crown itself, a kind of symbolic checkpoint on the road to becoming queen. That framing shows up constantly in royal coverage, and it is worth naming clearly as interpretation, because nothing in Spanish constitutional law ties military completion to fitness for the throne. Leonor will become queen when her father's reign ends, full stop, regardless of what she has or has not completed beforehand. The military service is a tradition, a preparation, a demonstration of institutional continuity, but it is not a formal qualifying exam for the crown, however much the language of testing gets attached to it in the press. What the military training actually does, in a more grounded sense, is buy Leonor something the Spanish monarchy desperately needs and cannot manufacture any other way: public familiarity. For 3 years, Leonor has been visible in a controlled, structured, relatively low-risk environment. Uniforms, ceremonies, supervised flights, scripted milestones with predictable outcomes. It has allowed the Spanish public, and international observers, to watch her grow up in real time without the pressure of full political or constitutional responsibility resting on her yet. That is, in its own way, a genuine test, not of her ability to fly a plane or jump from one, but of whether the country can build public trust and public interest in her before she needs it. And on that count, the early signs are mixed but not unfavorable. Leonor draws consistent media attention, both domestically and internationally, and her sister Sophia's recent public debut, delivering her first official speech just 2 days before Leonor's own ceremony, suggests the royal household is deliberately building a narrative of 2 daughters growing into public life together, sharing the load, supporting each other visibly, in a way that softens the intensity usually reserved for a sole heir. That softening matters, because the real test facing Leonor is not behind her. It is in front of her, and it has almost nothing to do with parachutes or naval maneuvers. In a matter of weeks, Leonor moves from a highly structured military environment, where the rules are explicit and the hierarchy is clear, into a university lecture hall at Carlos III University in Getafe, where she will study political science alongside classmates who did not spend the last 3 years in barracks and aboard training ships. The royal household has confirmed she completed the standard evaluation process required of students who finished secondary education abroad, and that her program will run 4 years, covering political science alongside humanities, law, economics, sociology, history, and international relations. This is where the more interesting and more genuinely uncertain test begins. Not whether she can pass her exams, though Spanish outlets have noted that the notoriously difficult statistics and macroeconomics courses in that program are feared even by students without a crown waiting for them, but whether she can function as something closer to an ordinary student while remaining, unavoidably, the most recognizable 20-year-old in the country. A 25-minute commute from Zarzuela Palace. A 9-to-2 schedule. Classmates who will have opinions about her, professors who will grade her, campus life that cannot be scripted the way a military ceremony can be. It is worth pausing here to be honest about what we do and do not know regarding how that will unfold. Nobody can say with certainty how Leonor's presence will affect classroom dynamics, or how her fellow students will treat her, or whether the university will make quiet accommodations for her security detail that other students never see. Spanish media reported a positive, welcoming reaction among students at Carlos III when her enrollment was announced, but that reaction, captured in the early excitement of an announcement, is not the same thing as knowing how 4 years of daily coexistence will actually feel, for her or for them. This is a genuinely open question, and treating it as already answered would be dishonest. The other test running in parallel is institutional rather than personal, and it is playing out on a calendar that barely pauses to let Leonor catch her breath. Just days after finishing her military service, she is expected in Catalonia for the Princess of Girona Awards, an event that requires her to review foundation documents, learn the biography of each honoree, and prepare and deliver a public speech, all while managing the logistics of a 2-day trip. This is not new territory for Leonor. She has been giving speeches since she was 13 years old, when she addressed the Princess of Asturias Awards in 2019 for the first time. But the frequency and weight of these engagements is clearly increasing, and it will only continue to increase as she balances a full university course load with an expanding institutional calendar that includes foundation work, military rank progression. She is scheduled to receive her official military commission in the summer of 2027, and an ever-growing set of public appearances tied to her role as heir. There is also a quieter, more structural test underway, one that involves not just Leonor but the monarchy's broader generational strategy. Spain's royal family has spent the last several years carefully, visibly investing in Leonor and Sofia as a pair, not a solo act. The two sisters have appeared together at Pope Leo XIV's audience in Madrid in June, at Sofia's first public speech in Zaragoza, at royal engagements stretching back years. This pairing does real work for the institution. It distributes public attention across two figures instead of concentrating it entirely on one, and it allows the royal household to introduce Sofia to public life gradually, under the protective shadow of her older sister, rather than thrusting her forward alone. Whether this strategy continues to pay dividends, or whether it eventually creates friction, competition, or uneven public interest between the sisters, is not something that can be predicted from the outside. It is, again, an open question, rather than a settled one, and it deserves to be treated that way rather than dressed up as certainty. What can be said with more confidence is this: the Spanish monarchy, unlike its British counterpart, operates within a political culture that includes a visible and organized republican movement, particularly in regions like Catalonia and the Basque Country, and a public memory of Juan Carlos I's departure from Spain in August of 2020 amid financial scandal, a departure that remains a live undercurrent in how younger royals like Leonor are discussed and evaluated. Leonor has had to build her public identity in the shadow of that scandal, distancing herself from her grandfather's conduct without ever formally repudiating him, maintaining a limited and carefully managed relationship with him from abroad. That is a genuinely difficult balancing act, arguably a harder and more consequential test than anything she faced in San Javier, because it requires managing perception and legitimacy in a way no military curriculum can teach. So where does that leave the question posed by today's headlines? Leonor's military training is finished. That much is fact, confirmed, documented, witnessed by her parents and her sister at a ceremony in Murcia. Everything else, university, foundation work, the slow accumulation of public trust, the shadow of her grandfather's exile, the still unwritten question of how a modern constitutional monarchy stays relevant to a country with a real republican current running through parts of its politics, that is not a test with a single ceremony or a single graduation date. It is ongoing, distributed across years rather than concentrated in an afternoon, and it will not resolve itself the way a parachute jump or a solo flight resolves itself, with a clear pass or fail. Spain's future queen has completed one measurable chapter of her preparation. Whether she is passing the much longer, much less structured test that actually determines whether the Spanish monarchy endures into the next generation is not something anyone, including Leonor herself, can answer yet. It is a test still being written, one public appearance, one semester, one foundation speech at a time, and the honest answer, for now, is that we simply do not know how the story ends.